The Arctic sky looked harmless that morning, pale blue, streaked with thin ribbons of white cloud, like silk torn by invisible hands. Elias Ward kept his eyes on the horizon, where the sun hung low and orange, unwilling to climb higher. The light here always seemed reluctant, as if afraid to trespass on the land of ice. Inside the cockpit of the Cessna 208, warmth hummed faintly through the vents. Elias wore his flight jacket zipped to his throat, gloved hands resting steady on the yoke. Outside, the world was a wilderness of white, endless, silent, and still that he'd flown this route dozens of times. From Resolute Bay to a research outpost near Devon Island, ferrying weather equipment, fuel, and occasional mail. A 6-hour round trip, nothing heroic. But every flight felt personal, like an agreement between him and the Arctic. Respect it and it would let you through. Forget that rule, and it would take you without warning. He adjusted the altimeter, eyes scanning the gauges. Oil pressure steady. Fuel at 3/4. Temperature dropping faster than usual, though 20 below and falling. He reached for the radio. Base, this is November 7-8 Charlie, crossing Sector Delta at 9,000 feet. Winds look calm. Temperatures mean today. A crackle of static, then a woman's voice. Clipped, calm, familiar. Copy that, 7-8 Charlie. Reading your position. You should see the outpost in about 40 minutes. Keep an eye on the weather. Satellites showing a low-pressure system moving fast from the west. Roger that, June. I'll beat it there. He smiled faintly. June, the voice on the other end of nearly every flight, had become a kind of invisible co-pilot. He'd never met her. She worked weather analysis from a base hundreds of miles south, but her voice had a steadiness he liked. In the Arctic, a calm voice was gold. For a few minutes, the flight was smooth. The horizon was a band of white and blue so vast it almost looked curved. Then, a sound, faint, metallic, reached his ears. Tap, tap, tap. He frowned. Checked the dials again. The engine noise had changed pitch, deepening to a rough growl. A vibration began in the floor pedals, gentle at first, then harsher. Not now, he muttered, oil pressure dipping, fuel flow fluctuating. The next sound was a cough from the engine, a hollow, dying sound. Then silence. Complete silence. The propeller spun down into a lazy, metallic blur. The cockpit dimmed as power flickered. Elias's stomach tightened, but his hands didn't shake. He'd trained for this. Thousands of hours in the air had made panic a foreign language. He switched to auxiliary fuel. No response. Tried ignition again. Nothing. Base, this is 7-8 Charlie, he said into the radio, voice tight. Engine failure. I repeat, engine failure. Altitude 8,000 feet, descending over an ice field. I'm looking for a place to. Static swallowed his words. He scanned below. An endless white sheet, flat and featureless. The frozen lake. He could make out faint cracks in the ice like veins in glass. No trees. No ridges. No place soft enough for mercy. He leveled the wings, lowered the flaps, and began his glide. The Cessna's nose tilted slightly downward. Air hissed past the fuselage, a sound like whispering ghosts. Come on, baby, he muttered, hands steady on the throttle. Just give me 30 more seconds. The altimeter spun downward. 7,000 feet. 6. The frozen lake rose up toward him like a white wall at a T 2,000 feet. The wind hit, hard and sudden. The plane shuddered, wing dipping. He corrected, gritting his teeth. The ice below blurred as snow gusted across it. 1,000 feet. 500. The surface rushed up, closer, closer, and then the impact came. A sound like the earth itself breaking apart. Metal screamed. The fuselage skidded, bounced, then slammed again, sliding across the ice. The windshield webbed with cracks. A wing sheared off, spinning away into the snow. The plane ground to a stop, nose buried in a mound of drifted white. Silence again. For a long moment, Elias just sat there, breath harsh in his ears. Then came the cold, seeping in through the cracks, biting through his jacket like a living thing. He checked himself. No sharp pain, no blood, just bruises blooming under the skin. He was alive. He unbuckled, pushed the door. It resisted, frozen. He kicked it open. A blast of Arctic air punched him in the face. It was so cold it burned. He stepped out onto the ice. The sky was already turning gray, the horizon blurring. He turned back to look at the wreck. The Cessna sat crooked on the frozen lake, one wing gone, tail half buried. Steam curled from the torn engine cowling. Engine cowling. It looked small now, fragile, a broken toy in a giant's hand. Elias took stock. He had a duffel bag, an emergency kit, a flare gun, 2 protein bars, a thermos half full of coffee, and a portable radio with maybe 6 hours of charge. He gathered what he could from the wreck: sleeping bag, a knife, a small axe, and 1 can of fuel. The first rule of survival: inventory everything before you need it. He crawled back into the cockpit, thumbed the radio switch. Base, this is 7-8 Charlie, do you copy? Static. Then faintly, Elias? Elias? Come in. What's your status? Relief hit him like heat. I'm down, he said. Forced landing on a frozen lake. Coordinates. He gave them slowly, carefully. Plane's wrecked, but I'm alive.
Repeat. I'm alive.
June's voice came back, urgent but calm. Okay, Elias, we've got your signal. There's a rescue team in Grise Fjord, but they won't reach you before nightfall. It's going to take at least 72 hours, maybe more. Can you hold out that long? He looked around, at the empty horizon, the long cracks in the ice, the gathering dusk. I'll have to, he said quietly. Keep the radio off between check-ins to save battery. We'll contact you every 6 hours. Shelter, water, heat. That's your priority. Copy that, he said. 72 hours. I'll make it count. He worked fast. With the axe, he split open parts of the fuselage, cutting out insulation foam to line a crude shelter, half inside the cockpit, half outside. He rigged the broken wing over the doorway as a windbreak, secured it with torn seat belts. The air was brittle and sharp, every breath like inhaling glass. When he finally sat down inside his makeshift shelter, darkness had settled in. The sky outside was a deep cobalt blue, the kind that only existed this far north. The moon had risen. Pale, watchful, indifferent, he poured a little of the coffee from his thermos into a tin mug. It had gone lukewarm, but it was something. The radio sat beside him, silent. He turned it on briefly, listening to June's voice relaying weather updates. Her tone was professional, but underneath he could hear it, concern. Temperatures dropping to -40 tonight. Keep your core covered. Keep moving if you have to. He smiled faintly. Yes, ma'am. Outside, the ice groaned. A long, low moan, deep beneath the surface. It sounded almost alive. A slow reminder that nothing here was solid forever. He tried not to think of the depth beneath him. Black water hundreds of feet deep, cold enough to stop a heart in seconds. He'd landed on it without choice, but every sound now was a warning. The groan came again, louder this time. He muttered, "Hold together, just 3 days." He lay back in the sleeping bag, eyes open, watching frost creep across the cockpit window and the reflection. He saw his own face, pale, drawn, older than he remembered. The lines at the corners of his eyes looked deeper. Maybe it was just the light. He reached for the radio once more, thumbed the switch. June! Static. June, you still there? Still here, came her soft reply. You holding up? Trying. Plane stable, but the ice doesn't sound happy. It's a lake. They shift all the time. You're safe for now. He let out a breath. You sound certain. If I don't sound certain, you'll panic, she said. So yes, I'm certain. That earned a quiet laugh from him, the first since the crash. Keep the radio off until morning, she said. Conserve power. I'll be here at dawn. Copy that. He clicked the radio off. The wind outside rose in a long, lonely howl. The plane shuddered slightly with each gust. He pulled the sleeping bag tighter, watching his breath curl white in the dim light. The cold pressed against him like a weight, heavy and patient. And for the first time since the crash, Elias Ward felt the edge of fear creep in. Not of dying, but of being alone with nothing but the wind, the ice, and his own thoughts for 72 hours that he closed his eyes. Somewhere in the distance, the ice cracked again, a sound sharp and clean, like a gunshot echoing across the lake. He whispered into the dark, to no one but himself, "Just 3 days. Just hold on." The end. Morning came without sunlight. The Arctic had a way of making dawn feel like an illusion, a grayness that softened the edges of the night, nothing more. Elias Ward woke shivering, the inside of the cockpit glittering with a thin skin of frost. His breath rose in clouds. The thermometer on his wrist read -41. He flexed his fingers, slow and stiff. Pain lanced through them, sharp and clean, like shards of glass beneath the skin. He rubbed his hands together, forcing warmth back into them, then pushed himself upright. The world outside was white and motionless, the kind of stillness that made sound seem impossible. He unzipped the sleeping bag and crawled into the cockpit's front seat. The windows were opaque with frost. He scraped a small circle clear with his glove and looked out. The crash site looked exactly as it had last night. The Cessna tilted slightly to one side, wing twisted upward like a broken limb. Around it stretched the lake, vast and empty. A faint fog hung over the surface, moving like breath over glass. He took a sip of what was left of his coffee, cold now, bitter, and turned on the radio. "June, this is 7-8 Charlie. You awake?" Static, then the same calm voice, faint but steady. "Morning, Elias. How'd you sleep?" "Didn't," he said. "Ice was talking all night. That's normal. Expansion cracks. The temperature swing makes it shift. Think of it as the lake breathing." He chuckled softly. "It's a loud breather. How's your shelter?" "Holding. Plane's still solid. But I'm running low on food. I've got 2 protein bars and half a thermos of coffee. Don't eat both today. Ration them out. You can melt snow for water, but you'll need a heat source. I've got a little fuel, but I don't want to waste it. Use the metal from the engine cowling. Make a fire pan. Small flame, just enough to melt snow. Keep it close, not open. The ice could weaken." He nodded, even though she couldn't see him. "Copy that. You're doing fine, Elias. Just keep moving, keep your mind sharp." Rescue team left at dawn. They're about 72 hours out if the storm holds off. 72, he echoed. The number hung in his head like a clock counting down. He spent the morning scavenging. From the wreck, he pulled wire, insulation, and a few plastic containers. He fashioned a small metal dish from a bent panel and used his lighter to melt snow into water. It steamed faintly in the freezing air, the warmth fleeting but comforting. He thought about the small things, how to dry his gloves, how to keep the wind from cutting through the seams of his jacket, how to mark his position with the flare gun if visibility dropped. Each task kept him occupied, kept the mind from wandering into dark places, but the silence worked its way in anyway. Every few minutes, the lake would speak. A groan deep below, followed by a crack that ran for what sounded like miles. Each sound made the hair rise on the back of his neck. It wasn't just noise, it was movement, the realization that the ground beneath him wasn't ground at all. Just ice, thin, shifting, temporary. At noon, he climbed out onto the lake to inspect the plane's underside. The ice was smooth, blue-white, glinting like glass under the dim sky. He crouched, touched it with his gloved hand. Solid, for now. But the cracks spiderwebbed in all directions. Faint white lines beneath the surface. He stood perfectly still, listening. A low rumble rolled through the ice. Somewhere distant, something fractured with a deep, echoing pop. The vibration traveled up through his boots, through his bones. He retreated quickly to the plane, heart hammering. Inside again, breath ragged, he forced a laugh. "Easy, Elias. You've got this. Just a frozen lake. Just air and ice." But his hands wouldn't stop shaking. By mid-afternoon, hunger gnawed at him. He broke one of the protein bars in half and chewed slowly, forcing himself to taste it, to make it last. The sweetness coated his tongue like glue. He sat by the window, staring at the fog creeping across the ice. The horizon had disappeared. The world was just white in every direction, merging with the sky, He clicked the radio on again, needing the sound of another human voice. June, it's Elias. Still here. You holding up. Define holding. You sound lucid. That's something. He smirked. I'll take the compliment. How's your visibility?
Fog.
Thick. Can't see 20 feet. Then stay inside. No wandering. Disorientation sets in fast out there. I'm not planning on sightseeing. Good. I've been tracking your position on satellite. The storm's moving slower than expected. You might get a clear sky tonight. Stars. Maybe. Northern lights if you're lucky. He leaned back, eyes on the frosted window. Haven't seen those in years. Then you've got something to look forward to. He smiled faintly at that, the corners of his mouth cracking from dryness. You talk like you've done this before. The end. I haven't, she said. But I've talked people through worse. You'd be surprised how much a voice can do. He wanted to ask her more. About where she was, what her world looked like, if she ever saw the same emptiness he did from above the clouds. But the radio crackled again, and her voice faded into static. June! Nothing. He waited. Tried again. June, do you copy? Only the whisper of interference answered. He turned the radio off to save battery. And then he was alone again. As evening fell, the fog lifted. The horizon returned. A thin, blue edge against the endless white. The cold deepened, the kind that made the air brittle, that made even breathing hurt. He stepped outside briefly, the flare gun in hand, and looked up. The sky had come alive. Ribbons of green light twisted overhead, shimmering across the stars. The aurora moved like water, slow and graceful, spilling color across the darkness. Elias stood still, off flooding through the exhaustion. He whispered, You're still beautiful, world. The sound of his own voice startled him. It had been hours since he'd heard it outside the radio. The ice moaned again beneath his boots, long and low. He turned back toward the plain, and froze for a split second. He thought he saw a figure standing at the edge of the fog. Dark, still, human-shaped. He blinked. The shape dissolved into shadow. Just a trick of light. He shook his head, exhaling. The cold played tricks. He knew that. The Arctic had always been a mirror for the mind. What you feared most. It showed you. He climbed back inside, sealed the entrance, and curled up in the sleeping bag. His stomach ached with hunger. His fingers ached with cold. Sleep came in fragments. Flashes of sound, of memory. He dreamed of the highway, rain, headlights, the screech of tires, a woman's laugh, then silence. He woke with a gasp, heart pounding. The frost on the ceiling had melted into tiny drops, glinting like stars in the weak light. He rubbed his face, muttering to himself, Don't do that, Ward. Not here. Not now. The radio crackled suddenly. He lunged for it. Elias? June. I thought I lost you. Signal dropped. Storm interference. You sound shaken. Just dreaming. About. He hesitated. Things I can't fix. Silence, then softly. That's how the mind tries to warm itself out here. It burns memories. He didn't answer. You need to keep your head in the present, she said gently. You've survived the first night. That's the hardest part. Feels like the easy part's over. You're stronger than you think, Elias. I can hear it in your voice. Her words hung in the cabin, fragile and real in the vast emptiness. He closed his eyes. Talk to me, June. Anything. Just keep talking. She began describing her own view. The monitors, the steady hum of machines, the smell of instant coffee, the sound of wind outside her station walls. Small, ordinary things. Things that belonged to a world of warmth and light. He listened, half dreaming, imagining her there. A woman alone in a bright room somewhere far away, her voice the only tether between his life and the void. Hours passed. The aurora faded. The wind picked up again, sharp and relentless. The plane groaned with each gust. Then, a sound different from all the others. A crack. Close. Loud enough to rattle the fuselage. Elias sat up, pulse racing. Another crack, deeper, from beneath. The plane tilted slightly to one side. Shit, He grabbed his flashlight, shone it through the floor gap. A thin line of black water shimmered in the ice below. The lake was splitting. He moved fast, threw on his gloves, grabbed the emergency bag, radio, and flare gun. He kicked open the hatch, stepping onto the ice. The crack ran 10 feet wide now, cutting through the surface like a wound. The plane groaned again. "Don't you dare!" he whispered. A final pop. Then a section of ice gave way beneath the tail. The rear half of the Cessna dipped, then froze in place, half submerged. Steam rose from the black water. Elias backed away slowly, eyes wide. His breath came in quick bursts. The Arctic, silent for hours, now sounded alive. Snapping, shifting, growling beneath him, he found a higher ridge of thicker ice 20 feet away and stood there, chest heaving. Watching the plane settle, he whispered into the night, voice raw. 72 hours, huh? You better be worth it. The end. The second night on the lake never really ended. It just blurred into the third day. Gray on gray, sound on silence, and a growing sense that time itself had frozen. Elias Ward hadn't slept more than a handful of minutes. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard it again. That deep, thunderous crack of the ice beneath the plane. By morning, the rear of the Cessna was locked in a jagged shelf of half-frozen water. Frost had claimed every surface inside, glittering like 1,000 tiny knives. His sleeping bag was stiff with ice around the seams. He sat there for a long moment, watching his own breath swirl in the cold. He felt detached, as if he were observing someone else. A man marooned on a lake of ghosts. He tried the radio. "June, this is 7-8 Charlie. Do you copy?" Static. Then her voice broke through, faint and warbling. "Elias, I read you. What's your status?" "Not good. The ice under the plane's breaking apart. Half the fuselage is dipping into the lake. I'm losing ground. Are you safe where you are?" "For now. But it's spreading. If this keeps up, the whole thing's going under. Don't stay in the aircraft. Move your gear onto stable ice. There's a ridge about 50 meters north of your coordinates. Looks thicker. You can shelter there." He turned toward the horizon, spotting what she meant. A faint rise where the ice had buckled upward, snow crusting its surface. 50 meters. That might as well have been 50 miles in this wind. "Copy that," he said. "I'll move out. And Elias, keep the radio on. Even with the battery low. I'll stay with you." Her voice steadied him. A small flame in a dark, endless room. He nodded to no one and began to work. He packed what little remained. The flare gun, the emergency kit, a half-full bottle of melted snow water, 1 protein bar, and his sleeping bag, the zipper frozen halfway shut. He left behind the plane's wreckage reluctantly, laying his hand on the cold fuselage one last time. "Thanks for the ride," he whispered. Then he turned north. The air outside cut through his jacket like razors. The wind had picked up, a shrieking, relentless gale that erased footprints as soon as he made them. Each step across the ice echoed, the sound unnaturally loud. Beneath him, he could hear the faint groans of the lake shifting. He moved slowly, deliberately, testing each step before putting weight down. The crack lines spidered out around his boots, faint white webs glimmering beneath the surface. The ridge loomed closer. He dropped to his knees and crawled the last few meters, afraid to trust the ice's silence. When he reached it, he collapsed against the mound, panting clouds of white. He keyed the radio. "June, I made it to the ridge. Ice feels solid here." "Good. You need to build shelter fast. Dig into the snow if you can. Use your sleeping bag as insulation." "Copy." He scooped snow with his gloved hands, forming a low wall against the wind. The effort burned in his arms, but the movement helped keep his blood moving. When he'd built something vaguely resembling a hollow, he crawled inside and wrapped the sleeping bag around his body. The wind howled over the ridge, carrying flakes of snow that hissed across the ice. He took a slow sip of water, rationed 1 bite of the protein bar, and sat in silence. "How's your core temp?" June's voice broke through. "Still breathing," he said, voice hoarse. "That counts for something. You're 2 days in. That's the hardest part." After this, the body starts to conserve energy. You'll feel numb but focused. Just keep your face covered. Copy that. He paused, staring out at the lake. June, you ever been up here? Seen it? Only on screens. Satellite feeds. Weather reports. I've never set foot there. Then you're lucky. I don't know. You're seeing something no one else will. Even in the middle of nowhere. That's something. He let that hang in the air. The idea that his suffering could be something rare, almost sacred. He didn't believe it. Not really, but he wanted to. Elias, June said softly, do you still have the flare gun? Yeah. Why? Use it if the storm gets worse. The rescue team's ETA is down to 36 hours, but visibility might drop soon. That flare could save you. He looked at the gun lying beside him, bright orange against the white. Understood. The storm hit by afternoon at IT came without warning. One moment, the wind merely whispered. The next, it roared. The sky disappeared under a wall of white. Snow ripped across the lake in wild spirals, erasing horizon and direction. Elias curled deeper into his hollow, radio pressed to his chest. The static was constant now, broken occasionally by June's faint voice. Elias, you still there? I'm here. Hold on. This storm's massive. You'll have to ride it out. Don't move. Not going anywhere, he said. You're doing good. Just keep talking to me. He did. He talked about nothing and everything. The smell of jet fuel, the taste of coffee that morning, the sound of his wife's laugh before the accident that had ended her life and driven him north. The words spilled out like breath he didn't know he'd been holding. She used to say I had ice in my veins, he told June. Guess she wasn't wrong. You're proving her wrong right now, June said quietly. You're still fighting. He smiled faintly. You don't know me, June. I know the sound of a man who hasn't given up yet. Outside, the wind screamed, battering the ridge like fists on a door. His shelter trembled. Snow found every opening, seeping in as fine powder that melted against his skin that he lost track of time. Minutes stretched into hours. His thoughts drifted in strange loops, half memory, half dream that he saw his wife again, Anna, standing on a dock in summer light, wind tugging at her hair. She turned toward him, smiling. Then her face blurred into June's voice at the end. Elias? Are you still with me? He blinked hard, trying to focus. Yeah, still here. Good. Don't fall asleep yet. You need to stay awake through the worst of it. He wanted to tell her he was trying, but his mouth wouldn't cooperate. His jaw felt stiff. The words caught somewhere between thought and breath that he curled tighter, holding the radio to his chest like a heartbeat. When the storm finally began to ease, he didn't notice at first. The world had narrowed to the sound of wind inside his ears, to the rhythm of his own shallow breathing. Then, silence that he opened his eyes. The storm had passed. The air was still, heavy, and blindingly white. The world looked new, reshaped. The ridge around him had half collapsed, snow piled in new drifts. The ice beyond was fractured, black lines crisscrossing the lake in jagged paths that he crawled out, blinking against the sudden brightness. His limbs ached as if he'd been beaten. The Cessna was gone that he stared at the spot where the plane had been, only open water now, steaming faintly under the pale sky. For a long moment, he couldn't breathe. The wreck had been his anchor, his shelter, his proof that he still belonged to the world above the ice. And now it was gone that he keyed the radio with trembling fingers. June, plane's gone. It went under. Static. June, do you read? Nothing. He tried again, twisting the dial, cycling through channels. Only white noise. The battery light flickered red. No. No, not now. He shook the radio, slapped it once. Desperate. Then, faintly. Elias? I copy. Storm, interference. June, he shouted. I'm here. Do you copy? Elias, battery. Low hold position. Flare, use, flare. Her voice faded into static. Then silence. The light on the radio blinked once more, then died. He sat there, staring at it. The silence pressed down until it hurt. For a moment he thought about giving up, just lying down on the ice, letting the cold take him quietly. It wouldn't be hard, just a slow drift into sleep. But something inside him, small, stubborn, refused. Maybe it was her voice still echoing in his mind, or the memory of Anna's laugh, or the raw, simple instinct to not die here. He took a deep breath, pulled the flare gun from his bag, and loaded a cartridge. The metal was icy against his glove. He pointed it toward the gray sky. "Here's your signal," he muttered. The flare erupted with a hiss, streaking upward in a burst of red light. It tore through the fog, a lone heartbeat of color against the endless white. Elias watched it burn, eyes watering in the cold. When the light faded, he lowered the gun, his arm trembling. The silence returned, vast and total. Then, faintly, a sound, distant, deep. A rumble of engines. He turned sharply, squinting toward the horizon. For a heartbeat he thought he saw movement, a dark shape cutting through the white. A helicopter? Or just the wind shifting the snow? He blinked, unsure. His vision swam from exhaustion. "Come on," he whispered. "Please." But the horizon stayed empty. The sound faded. Maybe it was real. Maybe not. He sank to his knees, the flare gun dropping from his hand. The ice groaned beneath him, but softer this time, almost gentle. Hours passed. Or maybe minutes. He couldn't tell anymore. When darkness finally returned, he lay curled against the snow ridge, radio silent beside him. Eyes half closed, he thought he heard June's voice one last time. Faint, soft, carried on the wind. "Hold on, Elias. They're coming." He smiled weakly, eyes drifting shut. Above him, the sky flickered with the faint green shimmer of the aurora, light dancing for a man half lost to the ice. And far off in the distance, a flare's dying glow reflected in the snow like a heartbeat refusing to fade at the end. Fade. At first, Elias thought the light was a dream. He woke to a faint glow pulsing through the snow, soft, red, rhythmic. His first thought was the flare, still burning somewhere. His second was that his body had finally given up, and this was what came next. But then he heard the sound again, not wind, not ice. A low hum that built slowly until it rattled the air around him. Engines. He pushed himself upright, dizzy. His vision blurred. The world tilted and snapped into focus. Above the horizon, faint through the mist, a single point of light moved, growing brighter. "Please," he whispered. His voice cracked. "Please be real." He reached for the radio, though he knew the battery was dead. He pressed the button anyway, whispering into static. "June, they're here. I think they're here." Nothing answered. But this time he didn't need her voice. The hum grew louder, distinct now, rotor blades chopping through the frozen air. A helicopter. Search and rescue. He scrambled to his feet, legs weak beneath him. The cold had hollowed him out. Every muscle stiff, every breath shallow. But adrenaline lit something fierce in his chest. He grabbed the flare gun, fumbled another cartridge into place, and raised it toward the sky. The helicopter's light swung wide, a thin beam cutting through the haze. For a moment it passed directly over him, and the world exploded into white and shadow. Elias fired. The flare screamed upward, bright and wild, exploding into red brilliance. It painted the ice in crimson light, reflected across the lake's cracks like blood and glass. The helicopter turned. He shouted, waving his arms, stumbling forward. His voice tore at his throat. "Here! Over here!" The wind carried his cry away, swallowed by the vastness. But the helicopter dipped lower, circling once, light sweeping the ice again. He laughed. A ragged, breathless sound, and fell to his knees. Relief hit so hard it almost hurt. Then the ice cracked. A single, sharp sound. Directly beneath him. He froze. Another crack followed, louder. The red light from the flare revealed a new fissure running between his knees, thin at first, widening as water seeped through. No. The ice split with a sound like thunder. The ground dropped. His legs plunged into freezing black. The cold struck him like a knife. He gasped, grabbing the edge of the ice with both hands. His fingers slipped on the smooth surface. The water dragged at his legs, heavy, pulling him downward. Above, the helicopter light swung back, blinding, close that he tried to pull himself up. His gloves tore. His arms screamed with effort that he got one knee out of the water, but the edge cracked again, giving way. The shock of cold knifed through his chest. He couldn't feel his feet, couldn't feel anything. The helicopter hovered now, the downdraft whipping snow into a storm around him. A voice faintly echoed through a loudspeaker. Words he couldn't make out, that he clung harder, teeth chattering so violently he could barely breathe. Hold on, Elias. They're coming. June's voice. Not through the radio this time, but inside his head. Clear. Calm. He smiled weakly. You made it. Don't let go. I'm trying. He dug his fingers into the ice, hauled again. This time his elbows cleared the surface. He pulled harder, screaming through clenched teeth. The helicopter light locked onto him, steady now. He saw figures inside, movement. Rescue gear, a rope descending. Almost there. He reached for it. But the flare's light flickered out, and in the sudden darkness, he lost his grip. The world tilted. The sound of the helicopter warped into something distant, underwater. His body slid forward, into the black. The cold closed over him like glass. The end. At first, there was no pain, just silence. The kind that filled every corner of him. He drifted downward, the faint light from above shrinking to a pale blur. Around him, the water glowed faintly blue, beautiful, almost holy. He opened his eyes wide, bubbles slipping past his face. The ice ceiling shimmered far above, distorted. He could see the shadow of the helicopter's light, diffused, turning the surface into rippled fire. He thought of Anna again, of her standing on that dock in the summer wind, of how she had smiled right before the crash, how she turned toward him, sunlight in her hair, and how, afterward, he'd never felt warmth again. He reached upward for a heartbeat. He thought he saw her there, just beyond the ice, her hand reaching down, pale and glowing, hair floating like light, and behind her, another figure, June, watching silently, her face soft, haloed in white. He almost laughed. Guess I made it, he murmured. The words came out as bubbles. Then something caught him. A pull on his arm. He blinked, disoriented. The rope. It had reached him. Hands gripped him from above. His body jerked upward, breaking the water's pull. The world came back in fragments. Noise first, shouting, engines, the whir of rotors, then touch, gloved hands grabbing him, dragging him across solid ice, then heat. A blanket thrown over him, someone pressing something warm against his face. He coughed up water, gasped, choked. The air burned his lungs. He opened his eyes, blinking through ice and light. Figures in orange parkas hovered above him. One of them knelt, checking his pulse. Got him! He's alive! He tried to speak, but his throat wouldn't work. Someone lifted his head gently. Stay with us, buddy. You're going home. Home. The word didn't feel real. He looked up at the sky, the clouds breaking apart now, pale sunlight leaking through. For a moment, he thought he heard June's voice again through the static of the helicopter's radio, distant but clear. Elias Ward, confirmed visual. He's alive. I repeat, he's alive. He smiled faintly, eyes closing. He woke later. Minutes, hours, he couldn't tell. Wrapped in thick blankets inside the helicopter. The world outside was a blur of white through the small window. Someone sat beside him. One of the rescuers, face hidden behind goggles. The man saw his eyes open and leaned closer. Hang in there, pilot. You'll be at the base soon. We've been tracking you for days. Elias tried to speak, voice rasping. The woman, June. The one on the radio. The rescuer frowned. June. He nodded weakly. She kept me alive. Talked me through the storm. The man exchanged a look with the co-pilot, uncertain. Then he said carefully, Sir, our comms team lost all contact with your frequency after the crash. The line's been dead since day one. Elias blinked.
No.
I talked to her. His voice broke. The rescuer hesitated, then gently placed a hand on his shoulder. Rest. You're safe now. But Elias's mind raced. The sound of her voice, so real, so calm, every word guiding him through the dark. Dead since day one? That couldn't be. He turned his head toward the window. The sun was low, bleeding gold over the horizon. The ice stretched endlessly below, vast and blinding. For a moment, he thought he saw something on the surface. A faint red glow, fading slowly. The last flare, still burning somewhere beneath the ice. Or maybe it was just his reflection. Flickering back at him, he closed his eyes again. The sound of rotor blades fading into a low, steady hum. Like a heartbeat. When he woke again, it was in a warm bed. White walls. The hum of machines. He blinked, disoriented. A medical tent, portable Arctic style, heated. A man in a parka stood nearby, clipboard in hand. Good to see you awake. You've been out for 18 hours. Elias tried to sit up. Where am I? Resolute Bay Medical Unit. You're safe. Mild frostbite, dehydration. You'll make a full recovery. He looked around. The tent buzzed with quiet efficiency. Medics moving, equipment beeping softly. Did you find the radio logs? He asked. The operator I spoke to, June. She's the reason I'm alive. The medic paused. Sir, there's no one named June on the Arctic comms roster. We checked. Elias stared at him. That's impossible. The man shrugged gently. You were in shock. Hypothermia can do strange things. He left Elias alone with those words, and the silence that followed was heavier than the cold had ever been. Later, when the lights dimmed and the tent grew quiet, Elias sat up slowly. His body still ached, but he could breathe without pain. He reached into the small plastic bag of his recovered belongings. His watch, a frozen lighter, the dead radio. He turned it over in his hands as he did. The speaker crackled once. Faint, barely audible, and for a heartbeat, he thought he heard her voice again. Told you you'd make it, fly boy. He smiled, just a small, tired smile, and let the radio fall silent again. Outside, through the thin plastic window, the night sky rippled with green light. The same aurora that had watched him those 3 days, dancing silently across the frozen world. Elias lay back, eyes open, watching the shimmer of it. He didn't know if June had been real, or a voice born of the cold and loneliness. But it didn't matter. She had been there when he needed her most. And sometimes that was enough. The ends. 3 weeks after they pulled him off the ice, Elias Ward returned to the north. He told the doctors he was just flying back for closure, to thank the crew, to see the wreckage site one last time. They didn't stop him. They said his body had healed faster than expected. Though his hands still trembled from the cold that had nearly taken him. He didn't tell them the real reason. He didn't tell anyone. Because in the nights after his rescue, when sleep refused him and silence crowded in, he would sometimes wake to a faint rhythmic static, the sound of a transmission buried deep in the dark. Every time he would reach for the dead radio, and every time he thought he heard her voice, soft, calm, familiar. Stay with me, Elias. The helicopter dropped him near the site at midday, under a pale sun that barely warmed the air. The wreckage of the Cessna was gone, swallowed by the lake weeks ago, but the rescue team had marked the coordinates with a metal stake and a flag that fluttered weakly in the wind. The lake was silent again, smooth as glass. He stood there for a long time, boots creaking on the frozen surface, the sound swallowed by the emptiness. The world was still and immense, as if nothing had ever happened here. He knelt and placed a hand on the ice. Beneath the surface, faint shadows moved, slow currents shifting under a sheet of blue. He thought he could almost see the outline of the plane deep below, a dark silhouette resting in the water like something asleep. He whispered, "You kept your promise, old girl. You got me home." The wind answered with a soft sigh. He pulled the small radio from his jacket pocket, the same one that had died in his hands during the storm. He'd brought it against everyone's advice. The battery compartment was corroded, the casing cracked, but it still felt alive in his palm. He turned the dial. Nothing but static. Then, faintly, "Elias?" He froze. The voice was fragile, thin as breath. "Elias, do you copy?" His heart kicked hard against his ribs. "June, I thought you'd stop flying." He almost laughed. "Guess I don't learn. You made it out." Because of you. Pause. You saved yourself. I was just a frequency. The wind rose around him, whispering across the lake like a sigh as he looked down at the radio, at the frost forming along its edge. Then tell me something, June. Were you ever real? Silence. Then, softly, does it matter? He felt his throat tighten. It does to me. Another pause. Then the voice, distant now, fading. You kept your promise. You held on. That's what's real. The radio hissed once, then went silent. He waited, breath fogging in the cold, listening for her again. But there was nothing now, only the faint groan of the ice, the whisper of wind. As he looked up, the sky above was a dull gray, but at the horizon color was gathering, faint ribbons of green beginning to shimmer. The aurora, returning. He smiled. Guess you're still watching, he said quietly. Then he stood, turned, and began the slow walk back toward the waiting helicopter. Each step felt lighter, as if the ice beneath him had learned to hold his weight. That night, back at the small base in Resolute Bay, Elias sat alone in the communications room. The other pilots were asleep, the hum of generators steady in the distance. He placed the old radio on the desk beside the new digital transmitter. Out of habit, he turned both on, one to the standard emergency channel, one to the old analog frequency he'd used during the crash. Static filled the air. He leaned back, closed his eyes, listening. The Arctic wind howled outside, rattling the walls, and then, faint but clear, the static shifted at a heartbeat of silence. Then, good evening, Elias. He opened his eyes slowly. Good evening, June. You still out there? Always. The static grew softer, almost warm. Then keep your wings steady. He smiled, voice barely above a whisper. Roger that. The signal faded again, this time for good. When dawn came, Elias was already gone. They found a note on the console, scrawled in his rough, steady handwriting. Heading south for a while. Don't worry, I'll be fine. The sky's clear where I'm going, and beside the note, resting on the radio, was his old flight patch, the one with his name and call sign. N78C. No one ever figured out how the analog radio had powered on again. Its batteries were long dead, but one of the younger comms officers swore that later that night, just before shutting down the systems, he heard a woman's voice drift through the static, faint, calm, and smiling. 72 hours. Fly boy. You did it. Outside, the Arctic sky flared green and gold, dancing over the frozen world. A promise or a memory, or something that lived somewhere between. And for those who knew where to listen, sometimes, in the quietest hours of the night, that same old frequency would hum to life again. The end.